Hi, welcome to one of my videos where I use exposure therapy to help treat my phobia. Welcome friends, people that watch my channel. I know it's been a while, it's actually been a long time since I've made a video. The main reason for that is just because I've been busy doing things. I've also had to deal with some personal issues. Um, but I'm back here again to talk about psychology, and I just finished a 10 lecture kind of course in pseudoscience and what's known as quackery or fraud science, talking about a whole bunch of stuff from like chelation therapy to aromatherapy to touch, hands-on laying of hands, all of the stuff that isn't considered psychology or isn't considered evidence-based medicine. So that's what I'm gonna go into now. That's what I want to talk about because I think it's very important. I've mentioned this before on message boards that psychology to take if you're suffering from a mental health illness, it can be very easy to rely on things that aren't evidence based to make yourself feel okay. Um, and that's okay, like faith, for example, that's okay if it's a complement to evidence based therapy. If, though, you're using it as a crutch and not really reaching out to what evidence based therapy is, like mindfulness, relaxation techniques, exposure therapy, right, medication, talking about it with others, if you, if that's, unable to be something that you can agree with, you're not going to get very far in your quest for mental health. You only get as far as how you feel it conforms to your belief system. So that's why it's very important to disprove a lot of these pseudoscientific ideas that creep into the mainstream public's awareness and try to keep pure what can help you versus what may actually harm you, and in some cases it has been recorded could kill you. So I'll get into that. But before I do, I want to talk about a couple people. Number one is James Randi. The other one is Harriet Hall. So James Randi, this is all coming from the YouTube channel known as the James Randi Foundation. And the James Randi Foundation is basically a YouTube channel that is dedicated to, I guess, his sort of lectures and stuff that he believes in. He was a former magician who kind of decided to come clean and tell everybody the secrets of different magical things. You'll see him on YouTube just debunking many so-called frauds, psychics that, for example, believe that they can see objects behind, a space, or can bend spoons. All the stuff that many people know about is in the traditional repertoire of what are known as magicians. And he basically said all the different ways that they're lying, and they're actually conning you and tricking you into wanting you to believe in them so you can buy their books or whatever. I'll show you a quick one here. I think it's called the Matchbox Trick, where I think it was Uri Geller, who's a magician who's been in much confrontation and argumentation with James Randi, and uh, he apparently tricked some scientists into believing that this trick here
Now you are looking at
is actually happening. And it's not. See, what he's going to do is an illusion where he takes the matchbox and he puts it on his hand here. And without any sort of manipulation, it goes up by itself, right? Simply by him holding his hand. It's levitating almost. Now, some people can say, well, that's supernatural. He must have some supernatural claim or something like that. Well, in reality, no. It'll show that that's not what happened. He actually just uh, bent the top part of it just a tiny bit to appear that it's not straight. I'm sorry. So he bent a tiny part of it, and it made it look like it's still fine, like it didn't be bent in any way, shape, or form. It still looks normal, so that when he right closes his hand, the bent piece, which is stuck on his hand here like this, on his top of his hand, on his skin, when it bends, it causes the matchstick to go up. So that's the same thing with a lot of psychology. A lot of people don't really understand what's behind it or what's going on with it, and it's easier for them to just be fooled. And so this is what these kind of YouTube lectures are all about. So let's get into it. So James Randi, if you want more information about James Randi, you can check out the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. They have a website, and also the James Randi Educational Foundation, as well as the James Randi Foundation on YouTube. Now, Harriet Hall is kind of like a disciple of James Randi. She's very has the same ideas as James Randi, and she's the one that did the 10 lecture debunking of all pseudosciences, from chelation therapy to aromatherapy to laying on hands to faith healing to any other pseudoscience you can think of, and show that not only are they not helpful and they're against the scientific method, they could be harmful and have led to deaths for some people. So let's get into that. Harriet Hall is going to be the one who did the lectures, and there's going to be I'll place the link in the description for people who want to watch the lectures unadulterated, but I'm going to be basically going through them not as detailed as she did. You're more than welcome to, but just to kind of talk about the most salient points that she brought up. So let's take a look here. Lecture 1 is going to be called Science-Based Medicine versus Evidence-Based Medicine. So there's also a little course document if you want to pull up. I'll pull it up here if you guys, feeling lazy or whatever. As you can see, it's the YouTube channel name, James Randi Foundation. This is the course guide for the video series Science-Based Medicine by Harriet Hall. So the 10 lectures, their titles, this is basically what we'll be covering, is the first one today would be Science-Based Medicine versus Evidence-Based Medicine. The second one is What is CAM? We'll get into that. It's called Complementary Alternative Medicine. The third lecture will be called Chiropractic. The fourth lecture will be about acupuncture. The fifth lecture will be about homeopathy. The sixth lecture will be about naturopathy and herbal medicine. The seventh lecture will be about energy medicine. The eighth lecture would be about miscellaneous quote-unquote alternatives. The ninth is about pitfalls in research, and the 10th is science-based medicine in media and politics. I know I don't really like to touch on current events, but that is out right now. A lot of people don't want to take the COVID-19 vaccine because of fears of whatever, right? So that's also another reason why this is really important. Even though I don't want to touch on politics, it's very important how science and the real world kind of interact, and how people are like, oh no, I don't believe in this, even though there's evidence that it makes sense. And I'm going to also go into my own personal anecdotes, because I have had certain of these. I've had acupuncture, and I've had what you call laying on hands. These are all things that I would be kind of into, not too much, but it's stuff that's recommended when I was in a belief system. It was recommended for certain things, and at the end of the day, those things didn't help. They actually, end of the day, like, I still feel pain from some of the acupuncture needles. We'll get into that later though. So let's start with science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine. So Harriet Hall is going to talk about basically science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine. So let's take a look here. What was the 10 things I talked about? The first slide she talks about is why so much about this complementary alternative medicine? Well, there's a lot of it that kind of it tries to be scientific. So a lot of this complementary alternative medicine tries to have some level of credibility by saying there's evidence for these, or there's studies for these. And that in itself doesn't mean much, because science-based medicine is evidence that has been peer-reviewed. It has been, the metadata has been analyzed, and there's been independent, double-blind, although placebo studies done to prove that what the scientists are saying is true. For example, this medication will do this. While the so-called complementary alternative medicine will kind of gravitate towards these things, saying, for example, studies show our product works, or the latest study shows this works, but they don't really go through the whole kind of metadata and the whole kind of all of the studies to find a scientific consensus. So they'll be selectively telling the consumers, who obviously aren't scientists, what is quote unquote good for them. Now, going back to the past here, if our ancestors didn't have science, there was only two ways of learning, right? Personal experience, like how they learned by themselves, or what others told them. Through the process of evolution, though, what we learned is that because of personal experience and what others have told them, like the tribe, they've been prepared to pay attention to stories, see patterns, and make fast decisions. That's very important to survival. But now that we're at the top of the food chain, those things, for example, aren't the smartest. For example, we may see patterns, but those patterns aren't necessarily scientific. They just make sense to us. And so then we take that drug and we don't really see the effectiveness. We wonder, well, what did we do wrong? The problem was we weren't looking at the evidence. So yeah, as she's saying here, in the past, it was very important if we're in the bushes like thousands of years ago, that what are we looking at right here? What is this? Is this a lion or is it just a bush? We don't know. That's why when we were kind of being evolved to where we are now and we're continuing to evolve, we had to find out where the predators were. When you'd have to find out uh, how to survive, and that's why it's good to know pattern recognition, but is it really good to know it now? Um, as Richard Wiseman would say, the ability to find patterns is so important to your survival that your brain would rather see a few imaginary patterns than miss genuine instances of cause and effect. That is the price you pay for being so amazed the rest of the time. So it's kind of like there needs to be some sort of evidence to kind of outweigh what we're looking at sometimes, because or else we just believe whatever we see. Um, so as I said here, there's some good results from evolution, pattern recognition, but as I said, that could become a problem because we could see patterns aren't there, and that could lead to making bad conclusions. Because it's important when you're running away from lions to act very quickly. But now that we're not running away from lions, it's not important to quickly in the mind make conclusions about things. Same with emotions. Back in the day, it was good to kind of have emotions to motivate us to act. If you fear, if you're anxious, there's probably something around, we don't want to chance it. Now we don't live in that world, and so now emotions, for the most part, interfere with our judgment. Psychologists call it emotional reasoning or emotional thinking. It's not the best thing to be doing. So let's look at this quote by Morgan Levy. Uh, mm, Thinking like a human is not a logical way to think, but it is not a stupid way to think either. You could say that our thinking is intelligently illogical. It's an interesting way of looking at it. Millions of years of evolution did not result in humans that think like a computer. It is precisely because we think in an intelligently illogical way that our predecessors were able to survive. There's a lot to unpack there, but he's basically just talking about, yeah, we're intelligently illogical. Yeah, we made some mistakes in the past that led to us, as we just mentioned, uh, making decisions on things that aren't necessarily the best, like logically thinking, but we're still here and we still have that impetus to still be scientific if we just allow ourselves and understand we're not in the jungle anymore. We're not in the wild anymore, struggling to survive with lions and whatnot. So, science. Science is very important for people who are getting into anxiety and wondering how to get better, because as you'll notice, just to I'm going to pause for a second. For one of the things that I noticed when I was getting into anxiety was there's so much out there on the internet, in the books, on podcasts, other people, other groups, that unless you know what evidence-based thinking is, you may just get overwhelmed and think, oh man, there's so much out there. It's so contradictory. It's so radically different from each other. How can any of this be a cohesive whole? How can any of this be science? And once you realize a lot of it is pseudoscience and you get down to the real science, then, it won't be as overwhelming. And that's something that takes time. You got to have a little bit of faith. You got to be like, okay, I know this is good for me. I just got to find out the right way of looking at it. And that's the way it works. So let's move up a little bit. I think I'm going too slow. Yeah, so back in the day, Here's a great example of pseudoscience, bloodletting. Back in the 1500s, 1400s, whenever it started, sometime in the medieval era, people believed, society believed, like our society now believes certain things. They believed that if you had an infection or a fever or you were sick in some way, they would put leeches on you or actually just cut you to allow, like, in a quote unquote non-lethal way, right? To allow your blood while you're sick to flow out of your body, and that apparently is supposed to be is gonna uh, take all the bad blood out, take all the infection out, and you'll feel better. Now, obviously, that's pseudoscientific because we know nowadays that that's not how infections work. They may be spread through the blood, but that doesn't mean you take out that blood because blood is also something that people need for oxygen and for the transportation of nutrients and whatnot. That instead we can get medications to get into the blood to purify the blood and purify the toxins, and so then they can be excreted. But that was, how did we learn that? We didn't learn that from we learned that from trial and error, and we learn that from what people around us have been saying, right? The scientific consensus evolves. Hey, a lot of the people that have been bloodletting have been dying. How many have actually been saved? And if you look at the ratios, 20% have been saved versus 80% which have died. Perhaps this isn't the best thing. And so, as brutal as it is, the scientific method allowed us further and further to become safer in how we treat each other. So that's an important thing, and that's what she's basically saying, that the pseudoscience of today is bloodletting, is all these different things she'll get into. Let's take a look here. There's also something else called the placebo effect, where we could take something that has no medicinal benefit, but we would still think it feels good. Like, we take a medication on the market that hasn't necessarily even proven to, for example, for cancer. I've heard crazy treatments about cancer. Dice up some onions and cook them with some whatever, and take that. And you may feel better after doing that. But if you were to do just that and not your, cancer treatments, you would die. You may feel better before you die, but you will die because you're not taking the treatments that are necessary that science says you do. Instead, you're taking the pseudoscientific theory that is endangering your health and you could die. So that's very important to kind of understand. The placebo effect doesn't mean it's working. It just means that, the power of suggestion is making you feel like, yep, I'm feeling better. Let's go on to how we come to believe ineffective treatments work, right? So we took a drug like this, bloodletting, or this cancer treatment of cutting up onions with this and that and carrots or whatever, pouring it in a stew. And we believe that it works. Oh, I'm feeling so much better. Why do we believe that? Well, there's 8 main reasons. The first one is that the disease may have run its natural course. Let's say you had a fever and an infection, and you were sick for 2 weeks, and it's the Middle Ages, and they're like, oh, you're so sick, we're going to get you some bloodletting, you'll feel better. But most people who have like a cold or a fever or some sort of infection, after about 2 weeks, you're feeling a little better. You're, depending on the severity of it, you're on the mend. So it may just be that it's coincidence that you got the bloodletting at the same time that the disease has run its natural course, so that you would have felt better anyway, but the bloodletting just kind of proves it. Oh, the bloodletting worked. The bloodletting worked. Second one, why we came to believe some ineffective treatments might work, is that many diseases are cyclical, which means they come and they go. So a disease may be more pronounced in the fall rather than the summer, and we may just equate, coincidence with causality. Number 3 is we are all suggestible. Right, we're all suggestible. We're depending on we only have a certain amount of attention that we can pay to all things, and as we said, we see patterns that may or may not be real. We're prone to emotion. We're logically logical, so we're all suggestible. Just look at the huge markets for quackery, frauds, pseudoscience, acupuncture, psychics, tarot cards. Right, we're all suggestible for these things. So for whatever different reasons, we all are suggestible. Number 4, the wrong treatment may get the credit, right? Number 5, the diagnosis and prognosis may be wrong, right? So let's say you have, for example, being treated for high blood pressure, but the doctor thinks you have lung cancer. So they treat you for lung cancer, and you feel better because they're treating you for lung cancer, but you still have high blood pressure. So you believe, oh, this is making my lungs feel better. I can breathe better. I feel better. But in reality, you're still sick with the original thing. Number 6, temporary mood improvement confused with cure, also known as the placebo effect. Number 7, psychological needs affect behavior and perceptions. And number 8, we confuse correlation with causation. It's just many of the kind of logical fallacies we make and just kind of mistakes we make in the world because we don't necessarily pay attention to everything that's coming into us because we're, as we said, illogically logical. There's only so much we can pay attention to. So that's why Harriet Hall is here to talk about, well, what is science-based medicine and what is evidence-based medicine? So this is a bit of the notes here. Science is a recent development. Evolution shaped our brains to survive as hunter-gatherers. Our thinking is intelligently logical. We are so good at pattern recognition that we see patterns that are not real. We tend to jump to conclusions. We prefer to get information from stories than from studies. We are unduly impressed by anecdotes. Science is a way of correcting for human misperceptions and cognitive errors, and scientific thinking doesn't come naturally. So how can we know if a medical treatment works? Unsystematic observation of apparent cures is often misleading. Bloodletting fooled doctors and patients for centuries. Another example is surgery that was believed to work for heart disease proved to be no better than sham surgery. The 3 most dangerous words in medicine, in my experience. Right? There are many reasons we have come to believe ineffective treatments work. We just got through them all. The scientific method corrects for errors in thinking. Medicine's beautiful idea is that every treatment must be tested. For example, in 1747, how did we discover the cure for scurvy? It was the first modern clinical trial. It was by James Lind. He discovered it by basically noticing that his sailors would be getting scurvy, and he asked them, what do you think the cure is? And some of them said it's this, some of them said it's this, and some of them said it's this. So he basically did it on a third of each of the population on a ship. Some got experiment number 1, some got experiment number 2, and some got experimental cocktail number 3. And he found that the one that worked was the one that we know now, which is vitamin C and orange juice that helps with scurvy. The others didn't work at all. And that is how science helped treat scurvy in 1747. So let's move on here. Let's ignore this. Right, wrong treatment, get the credit. Right, causal links that are not real. Right, correlation with causation. You can go over this yourself, but I just want to go over it quite quickly. For example, there's different types of causation. There's different types of relationships people have with each other. There's the temporal relationship, strength, dose response relationship, consistency, plausibility, consideration of alternative explanations, experiment, specificity, coherence. If any of these things are wrong, we may assume that this treatment is the cause, but it may not necessarily be, because we just made simple errors in judgment. As Richard Feynman would say, science is what we have learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves. So then, wouldn't everything else be just us fooling ourselves? If we divide the world into black and white, sure. That's kind of how it is, though, because science is truth. It's tested. No one can say you're wrong without bringing up proof, right? With pseudoscience, you don't have to bring up proof. You can just say it's unscientific because the science proves it, because science is true. It's just another way of saying it's not true, but we'll get into that in a second. Okay. Here we go. The first clinical trial of 1747. So James Lind divided 12 sailors with scurvy into 6 groups of 2 sailors each. And he was wondering, why are they all getting scurvy? Like, what is a way to treat this. And he tested 6 different treatments that I guess were known in the society at that time. One was a quart of cider daily, right? Cider, beer, basically. Another one was, second one was 25 drops elixir of vitriol, also known as sulfuric acid. That doesn't sound good. A third one was 6 spoons of vinegar. The fourth one was half a pint of seawater. Yeah, seawater. The fifth one was 2 oranges and a lemon, which was the one that worked. Spoiler alert. And the sixth one was a spice paste, plus a drink of barley. So that was the scientific consensus at the time, that there are 6 different treatments for scurvy. And you just got to be lucky with the one you take. But he didn't. He said, I'm gonna test which treatment works and see which one actually worked. And ta-da, it was the 2 oranges and a lemon. And we know now scurvy is caused by a vitamin deficiency from more and more trials. Moving on. She talks a little bit about vaccines and the connection to autism and all of that, but I'm not going to get to that. So let's talk about evidence-based medicine hierarchy. Right? Science-based medicine is not the same as evidence-based medicine. Science-based medicine tries to be like evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine is kind of like a triangle of hierarchy. You start with experiments, right? Or in vitro test tube research. Then, once you have enough scientific consensus that it's safe and it's effective, move up to animal research on rats or whatnot. Once you have enough information that that's safe and effective, something happens which is known as people have different opinions on your research. There's different editorials written about your research. There's different ideas promulgated because of your research. Then there's more and more bifurcation, more and more purification of the information coming out, not just from your research, but from other people, that we can start to create what's known as case reports of whatever we're studying: cancer, pseudoscience, headaches, heart disease, whatever it is we're studying. From those case reports, they become more and more purified into what are known as case series, where different parts of the case reports are put in different places for easy reference. From the case series, we have case control studies, which are directly taken out of the case series and the case reports, that again purify the information even more. And then only a small bunch of those graduate up to what are known as cohort studies, which are studies based on all of this previous research. And then a small bunch of those studies become randomized, controlled, double-blind studies, okay, which is just a big word for studies that people who are even doing it do not know who is getting the medication and who is getting the placebo. And even the people who are doing the studies don't know that either. It's like an independent party knows that. There is no conflict of interest. And the last one would be a systematic review and meta-analysis of all of this information. Now that is evidence-based medicine. Science-based medicine is trying to get some of this. Oh, there's a case report, there's a case theory, there's a study here. Oh, it's proven in animal research. But it hasn't been purified through the process of this EBM hierarchy that can say for sure, this is evidence. We have the evidence. I can look it up right now. It's in this case, it's in this study, it was from this animal research, back in this day, from this scientist, starting, there's like a whole log. We can go back and say, oh yeah, it makes sense. Instead, they're just trying to say, oh, some of it makes sense. That's the danger of pseudoscience. It tries to become scientific without actually having any science. So let's look at this quote here from sciencebasedmedicine.org. And they talk about the difference between science-based medicine and complementary alternative medicine, which we'll be talking more about next lecture. Alternative medicine, so-called complementary alternative medicine, or CAM, or as it become fashionable to call it, integrative medicine, is a set of medical practices that are far more based on belief than science. As Mark Crislip so pointedly reminded us last week, CAM is far more akin to religion than science-based medicine, SBM. However, as I've discussed more times than I can remember over the years, both here and at my not-so-super secret other blog, CAM practitioners and advocates, despite practicing what is in reality mostly pseudoscience-based medicine, crave the imprimatur that science can provide, the respect that science has. That is why, no matter how scientifically implausible the treatment, CAM practitioners try to tart it up with science. I say tart it up because they aren't really providing a scientific basis for their favorite quackery. In reality, what they are doing is choosing sciencey words and using them as explanations without actually demonstrating that these words have anything to do with how their favorite CAM works. I hope I was clear on that. So, of course, the gold standard for all of science is randomized controlled trial, or RCT. That's placebo-controlled and double-blind. If you have a study that proves your medicine and your conclusions and it goes to an RCT, then you have some impetus for helping people. We talked about this. We talked about this already. Let's go back to the course guide for a second. After the clinical trial, right? It says here, evidence-based medicine was a good idea that failed to live up to its promises. So the EBM hierarchy identifies the lowest level of evidence as in vitro studies, where we read this already, followed by animal research, editorials, and opinions, case reports, case series, case control studies, cohort studies, and the highest level, gold standard, randomized, controlled, double-blind studies, and systematic reviews. Something is missing, evidence from basic science. So basically, yeah, that's what science-based medicine is trying to do. It's trying to be like, there's more ways of knowing than Western science, and it has all these claims about health claims and practices and products using the best scientific evidence available, but it's mostly just kind of tricking you into believe that it's scientifically sciencey when it isn't. It's just kind of playing on our emotions and our gullibility and all the other logic. This is the scientific process, right? This is how that triangle I showed you is formed. It starts with a theory, an idea, and that theory needs to be consistent. If it's not consistent, it goes back to the hypothesis stage, which is where you just basically ask yourself a question, right? And then you make a prediction. And then you test that prediction. If it's not consistent, you modify your hypothesis and try again with another prediction and test it again until finally it becomes consistent and you observe it being consistent. Then you get the theory. So all these people talk about theory of gravity, theory of general relativity. It's something that has been observed, and it's something that has been questioned and tested. And the results are consistent, and the observations are consistent. Even things like theory of general relativity, we all know it can be proved by looking at the gravity of stars nearby in a certain part of the universe. Anyway, that's nothing to do with psychology. So I think I'll end it here. And this is one thing that, complementary alternative medicine or science-based medicine is trying to make us believe, is that there are other ways of knowing, like intuition, feeling, sensing, thinking. Well, if they are, science hasn't necessarily talked about them. Sure, you can trust your feelings, you can trust your intuition, you can trust your thinking, you can trust your senses. Having said that, if you're, have a bronchitis, do you trust your intuition, thinking, feelings, or senses, or do you go to a doctor to get medication? That's kind of, the trap of all the pseudoscience. They're like, oh, no, it's really just trust it. Don't believe that, science is always right. Just trust this will work because, it's your intuition, right? You feel it, I feel it, we all feel it. Unfortunately, the only people that are really feeling it are the people who will be taking all of our money and lining their bank accounts. And then people say, I'll get into this too, people say, well, doctors do the same thing. Yes, but the difference is doctors are right. That's the difference. Doctors are right. Pseudoscientifics are wrong. They're never going to be right. If they are, it's because of the reasons I said before. We messed with the causation and the correlation. So I'll end it here. This is lecture 1. And hopefully the next lecture next week. Unless it becomes really popular, I'm just going to do it probably a week at a time. I hope you guys enjoy it. Oh, last quote. Actually, you can read this yourself. I think I've said most of what I need to say. Remember, guys, stay with it.